You, Joe. Thank you, Sander. Thanks to our participants from everywhere, as far as New Zealand. Really happy to be with you today as we kick off 2023. I'm talking to you today about peace engineering and climate action. I'm going to detail what I mean by both sets of words and dive a little deeper into what we're trying to do with peace engineering. So first of all, I belong to the Peace Innovation Institute at The Hague, even though I'm based in Montreal. The Peace Innovation Institute started as part of Stanford, and it is an outgrowth of the Persuasive Technology Lab started by B.J. Fogg. So peace innovation, we define as technology that increases our ability as humans to be good to each other. Peace technology, we define as mediating technology to augment in a measurable, trackable way our ability to positively engage with each other for mutual benefit. That is the human superpower, collaboration. Peace engineering is something that we started in 2018. It is a platform that we think is quite unique to address these global issues in a multidisciplinary, silo-breaking way. And the analogy I use is to give engineering students and engineering practitioners the context to their work. In essence, typically in engineering, you're building a hole. We want to give you the context as to why you're building the hole, the geography, the history, the social dynamics around that hole, so that you as the practitioner understand all that and it connects, and it's not just technology for the sake of. So what are these big challenges? They're the ones that we're faced with. They're climate change, they're population growth, migration, urbanization, water access, and all of them. We are part of, and you can look this up on peaceinnovation.com, we're part of the Peace Engineering Consortium, and we've published a couple of papers on this. This is an ongoing effort that I'm mentioning to all the participants who are here live and those who are listening. If you want to listen, get more information and get in touch, contact me. I'll leave my contact information. We're always looking for partners in different institutions and private sector. So today we're going to talk about examples of concrete climate action that are all around us that we just need to surface because they work to change our mindset. So the talk is titled, "We're the Ones We're Waiting For," because no one else is coming to save us. It's basically us. And lots of impactful things are happening behind the scenes, quote unquote. But sometimes it does feel that we've been at this climate action talk for 52 years. That's when we started, or 53 now almost, Earth Day, 1970. And it's all doom and gloom for the most part in terms of the messaging. So we've mobilized enough people, but not enough to really change in the entirety of the systems that need to be changed. So what we're setting to do with this talk, which is a workshop, so it's as interactive as you want to those participants that are here. If you want to raise your hands and interrupt and ask questions, please do. And it's also the basis, I'll say more later, of a 10-week course that we're developing that we want to start giving this year to several universities, but also online. So our thesis is that we have at hand recipes for success from large movements that have measurably changed our world just in our lifetimes across our continents. And these are the ones that we need to go back to and analyze the dynamics so that we can take some learnings and bring them into the climate and biodiversity protection movement. So Amsterdam, near where Sander is, near The Hague, where the Institute is located, was not the bike capital that we think it is today forever. It was as car-centric as they come. Most cities in the Netherlands were, yet there was a movement that was able to change this intersection from the top picture to the bottom picture. And it took convincing, it took mobilization, and it took sound urban planning. You've all seen the videos that keep popping up on Instagram and TikTok of Utrecht that shows this intersection where people are biking and all this. You can see the before after. This is an area where the Netherlands has shown that you can measurably, quickly change the environment of everybody. And we need to recognize that there are dynamics that allow this to happen. The same in Paris, where I was born, where now you've got these plentiful bike lanes everywhere, and people think that they've been there forever. No, they have not. And let me tell you, the Parisians are a grumpy bunch, and they were not happy all throughout the road work that it took to get them in place. But now everyone can go from point A to point B using a bike, and everybody's happy. Again, it took a fraction of a lifetime because this was done in less than 10 years. And it has measurably augmented the standard of living of people in Paris. The taxi drivers will tell you different, but let me tell you that Parisians are very happy to have this infrastructure available to them. Again, a measurable, incremental, not super sexy, but available to see for everyone. This is my hometown now of Montreal, where we turned one of our big avenues, Avenue Mont-Royal, into a fully walkable, livable space throughout the past couple of summers. On the left, there's in 21, some people moaning about it and saying, no, this is no good. We're not happy because we're getting less business. We need to yank this. Those same types of people, shopkeepers, restaurant owners, and all that, a year later are saying this is an experience which is actually ending too early because actually business was better. This shows two things. One, people don't know what they want. And there will always be resistance. And it takes leadership, it takes mobilization, it takes focus, and it takes stamina in the social fabric to keep at it, to change things. But it will be hopefully for everyone's benefit later. And again, these are demonstrable, viewable things. This is a wonderful project, literally doors from me. This is an urban garden that was built on the asphalt itself. This is the actual street where it was on all summer. And it also featured workshops for people to get information on how to start their own little garden in their backyard or just their little balcony space, what have you. Again, demonstratable, repeatable, replicable things that change our world. So this shows that hopefully if we take this as our matrix, citizens and consumers, when you give them the right information, with the right tools, with the right message, they will respond to the prompt. Let me show a very specific example in the energy sector in California. In 21, they started, I think maybe a couple years earlier, to send out these flex alerts. September 29th, 2022, there was the potential for a brownout in California. They sent out a flex alert. Within 5 minutes, demand started to decrease. You could see the graph there. It's extraordinary. What it shows is proper use of technology with agnostic information from a trusted source, given at the right moment, you can get people to do the right thing. California, as always, previews the future and is joining us here in Quebec in renewable energy. This is in 21, they hit 95%. In 22, for the first time, they hit 100% renewable energy. These are things that the oil and gas lobbies have told us for decades could not be done. And they were wrong, and they were wrong for a reason. And we know why. And it came out again that their scientists had everything right, but they kept it from the public for their own selfish reasons. This is our energy mix here in Quebec. As you can see, it is primarily hydro-driven, 94%, but we are picking up in wind generation, and that is going to give us more tools in our energy mix. But again, we here are an example that hopefully can inspire others. So the background to all this. Earth Day started when in 1970, people got together and wanted to elicit a message to the world that we needed to pay attention to our environment. Little known fact, the first Earth Day demonstrations that you can see here in Philadelphia also featured, I couldn't find the photo, but it featured the almost ritualistic entombing of a car. It was a way to do away with car culture. Well, we didn't do a good job there, sadly, but we did start this movement in 1970, Save the Earth, etc. And it can feel that in some senses we are backsliding because not enough is being done in the minds of sort of casual onlookers, and we keep getting bombarded with messaging that, oh, the weather is in this array, which is true, and emissions are increasing, also true, but we'll get back to that. Yet you have this dissonance where in recent polls in the United States, voters, less than 5% of them were pointing to climate change as a life-threatening and worrisome backdrop, which sounds a little bizarre, but it is also, I think, a demonstration of just how strong the proverbial head in the sand paradox is. Like, we are in deep denial here. So my personal take is that the glass is half full in climate action. It is not half empty. It is half full, and we need to celebrate it and to show that we can change things. Now, some background, and this is controversial, but Noah Smith is a pretty respected opinion maker in the business world. He wrote for Business Week and now has his own newsletter on Substack, where he was showing this graph here, which demonstrates that we have been more or less flattening the curve when it comes to emissions. This is controversial, but it's true. They are still growing. China's still growing, India's still growing, but in essence, we are becoming more energy efficient in the global north and energy consumption. We could do way better, but we are doing some good, and we need to celebrate that to inspire people to keep going. Also controversial because of the way it's spread around the world, but we have decoupled, again, something the oil and gas lobby told us was not possible. We have decoupled emissions and economic growth. And this is being referenced more and more. And you'll see this, I've seen reports just this week on the decoupling. There's a big piece in The Economist on this. This is from the FT. And it is something to consider in how systems can be affected, because they are. So what are the recipes that we can use to build this massive climate action movement if we pivot back to successful, dynamic movements that have changed systems across the world? I'm going to cite a person I've started a conversation with, David Fenton. I'll get to his pedigree in a second, but he says something really interesting in the sense that if we want to mobilize and activate, we have to stop using obscure slogans. No one understands emissions. No one understands carbon. We need to talk about pollution. David has been at this for 50 plus years as a progressive agitator in the world of music, in PR. He worked with the ANC. This is him with Nelson Mandela. And his recommendation is that we switch metaphors and visual imagery and talk about burning oil, coal, gas has put a blanket of pollution around the earth. And that's what's trapping the heat that used to go back out. Very simple, people get that. We're trying to build these rules for a successful movement that I want to submit to you and interested to hear your comments on. The first one is find a concrete goal and focus so you can change one thing and you make one thing happen. Reduce CFCs. This is something I come back to later in the talk. We save the ozone layer. Women's suffrage, banning smoking, one thing. The second one is work to change the system at strategic points and play the long game. You're not going to get everything done at once. Use communications networks in the real physical world. Yes, we're doing this over Zoom, but the society existed before it. And the comment we make here is don't be a slacktivist. Don't think that because you're doing stuff online, it really changes things. No. Write a letter to a physical letter to your political representative. Call, show up. You need to send physical signals. You need to engage with power brokers. People say that when Walter Cronkite, the ultimate information power broker, basically said, it's over, we can't win the Vietnam War, it was done. And it's true. So you need to cultivate these people. Incremental, to finish off the fifth potential rule, is good. Change is very scary to a lot of people. Small chunks versus big chunks are the solution because they can become exponential chunks. Ingredients then, therefore, you need to consider as you build a movement is solutions versus just rage, compressed timelines versus long-term that demotivates. That's why, oh, we're going to do everything by 2050. It sounds like far off into the future to too many people. We need to be much more results-driven in the near term. You also need to have people appoint themselves as potential heroes to get rewarded so that there's accountability. You need to clear up the financing setup, and you need to use social credit as much as possible. So we're going to go into some examples here. Some of us here in the call grew up is the case with me, in a world where smoke was everywhere. You could get secondhand smoke in a restaurant, people smoked in airplanes, in trains. You'd come back from an evening out and you'd be reeking of smoke even if you yourself did not. And it felt like, that's it, we couldn't do anything about it. Doctors were used in this Lucky Strike commercial to sell cigarettes. On the bottom there, you can see people smoking in each other's faces inside a college in Vancouver in '86. But what happened? What happened was we combined things over the long term by using science, by using legislation, by using pricing and peer pressure to reference what we were talking about before the talk with Joe. There's a hockey stick moment that you can see here on the bottom right, where at some point there's an exponential decrease in the use of tobacco products. Why? Because we combined all this and it worked. And now we live in a near smoke-free world when it comes to the public space. And if you had told me 25 years ago, 20 years ago, that this was going to be the world we would live in, I would not have believed you. Because to me, it sounded impossible because it's a social habit. You can't get people to break their social habits, and it was cool to smoke and all that. All true, yet we did it. And we did it by using very proven recipes for success. The same with seatbelts. Seatbelts are fairly new in the automobile industry, and they were more or less imposed by one man, Ralph Nader, who wrote this book, Unsafe at Any Speed, who was a very compelling witness in front of the US Congress. And he and a very committed but small group of people changed an entire industry and imposed the seatbelt. And as you can see from this reference from 2020, before face masks, Americans were against wearing seatbelts. As recently as the early 1980s, not so far off in the past here, most people were opposed to them and were saying that 65% were saying, oh, even though it's against the law, I won't wear it. Well, who doesn't wear a seatbelt these days? Seriously. So again, a thorny issue, a technical solution, but social dynamics had to work itself in the process so as to make this very sound technical advancement something that everyone embraced. But we did it, and we did it using these dynamics. We used it as well to win the fight for female suffrage. This is a map that shows when female suffrage became law in all of these countries. It took dedication, it took mobilization, and it took decades and decades, but it happened. The same is true in how we curtailed pollution, to get back to the operative word that we need to get back to. How do we get the Clean Air Act? How do we get the Clean Water Act in the US and their equivalent in Europe? Well, by people mobilizing. Why? Because people in the US Northeast in the 50s could see the pollution the same as you could see it in the West. You could also see rivers being so polluted they would literally catch fire because of the chemicals that were just spilled in the waterways. That does not happen anymore because of legislation. That didn't happen by magic. It didn't happen because people, one morning woke up and thought they were going to do a good deed. No, mobilization, dedication, focus. So climate action really works. And I want to focus on something that's been thankfully in the press recently, because the UN Environment Program came out with a report that showcases actual data results that come back to this, which has been in the works for a long time. It is how we saved, as a world, our ozone layer, which protects us from harmful effects from the sun, by signing a treaty 35 years ago in my city of Montreal. And these are some images I want to share with you of what would have happened had we not signed the Montreal Protocol and its subsequent amendments. It's pretty scary stuff. Now, what happened was that we got everybody in the room and we did the right thing. Yet some in the climate movement or in political circles say, yeah, but you can't really, equate the whole entirety of climate biodiversity protection with this, because this was a technical solution and you could only, you could change it by influencing industry and it was easy. No, it wasn't easy. It was done, but it was not easy. And we potentially saved huge amounts of global warming by doing so. And these things take time. I'm going to pause for a second and explain what I'm showing here. I'm showing John Kerry in Kigali, Rwanda, for the 28th meeting of the parties to this protocol. So after the first signature in '87, there were subsequent amendments. And this is the Kigali amendment that was negotiated in 2016. It took until 2022 for it to be ratified and then signed by the US president. It takes a long time, but it was celebrated because it is phasing down, as President Biden here says, further polluting chemicals so that we can hopefully do even better in terms of protecting ourselves from these harmful rays. And for everybody who tells you, this is for the US audience, that these things are controversial and extremely political and you can't get bipartisan votes. Not true. Mitch McConnell and other Republicans, 21 Republicans voted for this in the Senate. Anybody who follows US politics will tell you this is not an easy task to accomplish, yet it was done. So for all the naysayers who say things are too political, and it's divisive, and this and that, this is a perfect example that shows that if you have the singular focus, the mobilization, and the thrust to get things done, they can get done. By the way, this was very, if not almost without media coverage. Is this a good or bad thing? Maybe it's not a bad thing because that way it was done without any without being instrumented against the science. The way that we got same-sex marriage, the idea started on the cover of a magazine in 1989. In 2013, it wasn't the law yet, but it was almost there. In the same way, I had the map for the female suffrage. This is a map that shows where it is now legal for everybody, basically, to get married. Again, something that we didn't think would happen in our lifetimes did very quickly. And it is not as controversial anymore because it happened. Now, all this flows back, and then I'll finish there and open up for questions, to one man, Gandhi, who in 1930 at this speech is explaining to this multitude of Indian citizens that they can make the most tyrannical government unable to arrest them because of the sheer numbers. And this is them preparing for what was called the Salt March, where they went to the ocean to basically do their own salt by using seawater. Why I use this example? Because here you have one person who's able to inspire millions with a very simple message. And I think the most simple and impactful one is that he was explaining to them how each of their individual actions was part of a collective. And this is where we need to come back to in how we want to solve things, specifically in using systems dynamics, and that frame of mind is we can replicate things across sectors, across geographies, across the world by each doing our part as part of a collective goal. And this is somewhat missing in the messaging that is used. And he, and I'll end it there quickly, was a very savvy user of the media. He wasn't Time Magazine Man of the Year in 1931 just by chance. He wasn't featured as the most talked about man in the world that same year in a small paper called the Burlington Hawkeye, still exists to this day, in a small town in the middle of Iowa. He was on page 5 because of the power of his message. So all of what I previewed today is part of a in-progress course plan over 10 weeks that I can share with everyone who's interested. Other work that we do is side events to large UN gatherings. So we started this with COP15, and we're going to do some work around the UN Water Conference. So we are definitely looking for additional help in furthering the reach of our message. We are looking for partners in universities. We're looking for people to help us with content and the like. This is my email. Please email me if you're interested to participate and join us in this movement. I'll end it with a call for each and every one of you to, after this talk, think of one thing that you can do in your immediate community, and you can talk about to your neighbors, friends. Send me an email about it, and I'll include it as a testimonial that we do as part of this workshop that we give at universities. I want to thank you for your interest and looking forward to your questions.
That was wonderful, Frederick. Thank you very much for reminding us of the success that we've had in the social movements. Let me open it up for questions. By the way, Frederick, when you have, if you can get me the link to the workshop or course, I will include it in my summary that I send out after this once we have the presentation posted. All right. Why don't we open it up for questions and fair game on anything. So I hope we have some questions for Frederick.
Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting and inspiring presentation. And I was wondering, from my field of interest, what you currently see is the rise of disinformation, and basically a new struggle that different groups with different insights are posting different forms of information, and some is considered the truth, and some is considered phony.
So-called alternative truths. So I also give I also give a lecture on that specific topic. This has been seen before, and the recipe for success there is the establishment of authority-based beacons of truth that are incontrovertible. And this happens with time and with audience participation. In the 19th century, in most capitals of the then modern world, you had what was called the yellow press. You had tabloid press in New York that for weeks talked about men on the moon, and it was fake. You had all sorts of weird stuff that was in the quote unquote paper. It was all make-believe stuff. We had a situation where the US was more or less thrust into a war with Spain in Cuba in 1898 because one man, William Randolph Hearst, wanted a war so he could have something to cover in his papers. This is all what we had to deal with. Very, very similar to the situation we're faced with today. So history seldom repeats, but it rhymes, or there's echo. In answer to your question, the more people stand up to disinformation by standing their ground, the more they will change minds. Now, there are some that are so in denial with climate and other pressing social issues that they revert to apocalyptic thought because it's escapist for them. And those people are not redeemable. Sad, but they're not. But there's a majority that are persuadable. And I think we can and will, I've said this for a long time, see what was done with newspapers, where editors were not liable for a very long time for what was printed. And the minute they became liable, well, the truth basically was there, and this information disappeared. Section 230 of the US Code for Communications is an aberration. There is no way that it stays. Europe is going to lead the way, and Europe is going to make sure that big tech is liable personally. Every single CEO is going to be liable on their personal assets when things will happen, and you'll see how quickly the change is going to work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put myself to the front of the line for a moment, but I do hope I don't want to hog the microphone. So, Frederick, many of us come from scientific or engineering backgrounds, and we adopt a language that suits us as opposed to the common person.
Yep.
So I know I'm guilty of that as charged, but I do tend to try to look problems and say, how can we amplify them by creating a standard understanding of them.
Yep.
So when you talk about recipe, right, I
Yep.
take the word recipe and I say, oh, we're talking about a systems dynamic model, right?
Yep.
And we want to repeat that model. So,
We can.
and when we talk about changing social movements and societies, I would probably tend to replace that with, oh, well, we're doing social engineering, right? This is something we actually can engineer. Of course, there are many people who are scared off by the concept of social engineering because it sounds like it's a bad thing. But I'm curious about.
It doesn't need to be a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm curious about, and Sandra and Ann, I'll offer this up to you as to, when we talk about social movements, and Frederick too as well, the ability to describe them in a system dynamic model. What are all the variables that go into and the feedback mechanisms that go into getting the end result that we're looking for? Have any of us seen these kinds of large models for social movements? What are the best practices for trying to describe that recipe to the world?
Okay, so I'm sharing the slide with the rules that we want to come up with. Again, these are work in progress. Given that I'm a student of history, I see that most every tangible positive result never happened by chance. It happened because you had a small group at first of people that were committed and were able to convert, cajole, influence others to join them. You could start as early as the first religions, polytheistic and then monotheistic religions. That's how they worked, and they still to this day. We are a social species. We're not strong. We don't have a husk to protect ourselves. We have each other. And that's our greatest strengths and our greatest weakness. Because we're driven by impulses that some of us are unable to channel correctly, we go off the deep end. But we're always able to save ourselves until it's way too late, before it's way too late. So I have hope that we can use some of this to, again, influence others. I would be interested, in answer to your question, in how we can use the systems dynamics model to analyze a couple of these. And this is actually going back to the course detail that I showed. This is something that we do want to do in creating these activist journey maps and these movement journey maps. These are assignments we want to give the participants to the course, is to choose one and to analyze how are people getting involved, what are the touch points and therefore the feedback mechanisms, what are the engagement inflection points, what is the activist conversion funnel, what is the timeline. And
then the product there could very, very easily be a system dynamic model.
Exactly.
Other questions, Frederick?
Hi, this is Ann. I don't have a question, but Joe, building on what you just were talking about, and Frederick, as you were going through your presentation, by the way, a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am currently, for my dissertation, building a model of a military force resistance against an invasion. And as you were going through, I'm like, wow, the similarities, the conflict is different. Instead of, building up military personnel for physical kinetic battle, you're talking about building up activist personnel for a battle of sentiment in the mind. And
Yes.
In my model, I actually have a capture mechanism to bring in how sentiment and anti-sentiment can help build not just the number of personnel that you can utilize, but the morale and how to help them keep going or push them back. So I don't know that that would necessarily be a generic model, but I could see similarities to, and I was going to say, oh, do you have a model? Because I'd probably add that into my model.
Which conflict are you using as your base point?
I'm actually using the Battle for Moscow. And even more specifically, because my dissertation is trying to expand system dynamics modeling into wargaming to help create quantitative criteria to assess the design of the game.
Okay.
So there's actually a publicly available war game on Battle for Moscow that you can Google and download. So I'm
The Battle for Moscow, Napoleon's Battle for Moscow.
Hitler's battle.
Hitler's. Okay.
Yeah.
Or the current battle for Moscow.
Or the current. I was going to reference
Well,
because going back to your point, I come from a military family, and I was basically brought up with war stories, morale being, according to my grandfather, uncles, everybody was in the military, just as your single best weapon. And you could clearly see it right now before our very eyes, where you have in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, you have a hyper-mobilized, morale to the max populace in Ukraine, and then you have a blob of nothingness on the other side, where we're basically seeing just how hollow it is because they have nothing.
Lots of resources, but
that's not enough.
Right.
yeah.
And it's just interesting, again, from my perspective, how the Battle for Moscow was pretty much the opposite, you know, with Russia being invaded, and the Russian morale was really solid there.
Sure.
And the German was not, and how that seems to be being missed right now, which it was such an important part. But anyway, so I see similarities.
Yeah.
And this is in part why our SIG changed its name, because too many people were viewing us as just the warmonger SIG. And it's really about conflict and stability and resistance. So that's why we changed the name. So yeah, I see all kinds of similarities and crossover.
Well, please get in touch with me, because I'd love to apply this thinking to what everyone is trying to war game right now, which is the coming conflict in the South China Sea over Taiwan, where we're going to see the same thing. We're going to see a hyper-mobilized, very sure of itself, morale to the max Taiwan, much more than people think, against CCP China, where people hate them. And we just saw it weeks ago, where you had demonstrations in the street, which basically changed the policy that they said they will never change, just to show you just how hollow that regime is, and it's going to fall. The same in Iran. So we could war game all three, and it would be interesting to see how quickly things will unravel.
I will reference the book Chip Wars, which sets the stage for the pending potential conflict that could exist in Asia.
I'll share for whoever's interested some writing I've done on that specific topic on semiconductors. I started that 3 years ago. Yeah.
Other questions?
Well, in the follow-up of the dialogue, there's also a model, I believe, built by WVPI. It's called Soldiers, Bandits, Farmers model. It's more like a theoretical model, but it's about exploring how stable governments are. But it basically embraces a certain element of change, where different people belong to different fractions, and they have a certain state of the fraction, but also the economic conditions that they require an income.
That's right.
And it might be of interest to have some learnings from that model as well. A friend of mine used that model to analyze organizational change, and more from a perspective, what is the number of people that you need to create movement? You need a certain number of people that will lead the movement, and
That's right.
the other way around, you have a certain number of people that might be able to stop a movement, and if they are below a certain threshold, the movement will continue.
If you could send me that research, I'd be most interested.
Yeah,
right.
it's by Khalid Saeed and Oleg Pavlov, both from WPI. And
WPI, okay.
yeah, as Sandra was talking about, it was actually based on the dynastic cycles within China and how the economic landscape changed as the dynasties changed hands.
Okay. Interesting. Excellent.
Sandra, what's everyone's thought about in terms of when we describe these systems that and these problems that we're working on, are they always best to be described in a very specific problem, or no, let's make them general so that it becomes a recipe that can be used to describe multiple problems and fit them. So specific models versus general models.
So I would reference my beginning slide here on how we're trying to address what we're trying to address with peace engineering, climate change, first and foremost, linked very much to loss of biodiversity. I need to amend that. Everything having to do with population growth and decrease. You look at all the numbers that are coming out of China. Everyone who's been studying their demography, knew this was coming. It's going to be much faster than we think. The same in Russia. And actually, this explains, demographics explain why the war was attempted this year, or last year rather, by Putin, because he knew that he had just enough of the number of able-bodied men that he won't have very soon because of their demographics. We will see a changed world in that respect, and migration is going to be a big part of it. One of the key areas that I'm trying to focus on that's very multidisciplinary is the security of water, its access, how we're using that resource to make sure we still have access to it in plentiful ways. So these are very different types of issues that we're trying to address using the peace engineering framework we're building, and we're doing this with IEEE, as I mentioned, as a partner.
I would say, Joe, along with that, from kind of a larger perspective, most people prefer to, I think, learn something for themselves other than being told what the right answer is.
Mm-hmm.
And they're oftentimes using some of the games that have been developed from system dynamics modeling, like fish banks or some of these others. They are a similar type of problem, but not the exact problem. And so people then see the similarities and draw their own conclusions to, help themselves learn. So they're actively learning by playing that. So I think if you can see where there's a generic archetype type of problem that you can build a different type of story around, and then people can learn that for themselves. I think that's a strong way to go.
That's a really good point. The engineer in me always wants to get to solution and try to say, okay, we know how to do this stepwise, and that's not necessary. Leading people is sometimes better than trying to give them the answer.
For sure. For sure. And that's what we're actually gravitating more and more back to the roots of the lab in the persuasive technology field, to using game design. And we have actually one of our colleagues is a game designer. So yeah, wholeheartedly with you, Anne and Joe. Yeah, for sure.
I will post that PDF file that you provided, Sandra, in as part of the materials for distribution as well.
Yes, wonderful. Wonderful. Any other questions? Right. Justin, any comments from not, you don't say down under because you're in New Zealand, but you know what I mean, and from the other side of the globe.
No comments from me, but very interesting. Thank you.
Okay.
I will add, Justin, so I know that your firm has the tagline, discuss, understand, and act. And that very much comes to mind when I think about social movements. You know, how do you get people to first embrace the discussion, comprehend it, and then ultimately, right, make decisions to act upon it. So I would like the tagline of your consulting firm.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that aligns with its origin, very much so.
Well, okay, we are just about at the top of the hour. Frederick, just want to thank you for a well-delivered presentation.
Thank you.
I'm glad to see we had good attendance, and I look forward to driving the year forward, and perhaps driving more joint monthly meetings between the other SIGs. I think it's a great way to create audience, and the interdisciplinary views, I believe, are fruitful ways of looking at these whole topics and understanding the challenges that we confront when we're examining whole problems. So thank you, everybody, and wish you all a great rest of the year. Sanders, any closing remarks?
No, I think this was a great conversation, and I just want to say thank you for this